The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grindstone, a trendy cafe in downtown San Diego, casting long, warm rectangles of light across the polished concrete floor. The air was thick with the hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of ceramic mugs, and the low, comfortable hum of conversations. At a small table by the window, a woman named Sarah Chen sat with a posture that was both relaxed and utterly still. She was in her late 40s with a lean, corded frame that her simple linen shirt and jeans couldn't quite disguise. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her eyes, the color of dark obsidian, were fixed on the screen of her laptop. She was a woman who appeared to be part of the scenery, just another patron working on a project. To the casual observer, she was an easy target. But her stillness, however, was not the stillness of distraction. It was the stillness of a predator at rest. Every few seconds, her gaze would flicker up from the screen, sweeping the room in a microsecond assessment before returning to her work. It was a habit, a deeply ingrained survival instinct that no amount of civilian life could erase. She was reading the room, cataloging threats and anomalies as unconsciously as breathing. The barista with the new nose ring, the stressed-out mother wrestling a toddler, the two college kids arguing over a textbook, all filed away as non-threats. Then her eyes landed on the trio who had just pushed through the door. They were three young men, probably early 20s, radiating a specific kind of urban arrogance. They moved with a swagger, and a collective gait that said they owned the space they occupied. The leader was tall and wiry, with a sharp, intelligent face and eyes that were already scanning the room, not for safety, but for opportunity. His two companions were bulkier, more like enforcers, with deadpan expressions and hands shoved deep into the pockets of their hoodies. Sarah's gaze lingered on them for a fraction of a second longer than the others. Their body language was wrong. They weren't there for coffee. They were casing the joint. They ordered nothing. The leader whispered something to his companions, and they split up. One loitered near the door, pretending to be engrossed in his phone. The other drifted towards the restrooms, creating a blockage in the narrow hallway. The leader, with a practiced nonchalance, began a slow circuit of the cafe. In his eyes alighting on purses slung over chairs, phones left on tables, laptops open and unattended. He was a shark, circling for the weakest fish. His gaze eventually settled on Sarah. She was a woman alone, seemingly absorbed in her computer. A large, expensive-looking designer tote bag sat on the empty chair across from her. A newer model iPhone was placed on the table right next to her elbow. To him, she was the perfect mark, distracted, physically unremarkable, and surrounded by valuables. He gave a subtle nod to his friend by the door. It was time. The plan was simple, a classic bump and run. His bulky friend would create a distraction, and he would move in for the snatch. The friend near the restrooms suddenly stumbled out, lurching into a passing waitress. The young woman let out a surprised yelp as a tray of empty cups clattered to the floor, the sound sharp and sudden in the otherwise peaceful cafe. Heads turned. A ripple of concerned murmurs spread through the patrons. This was the moment. The leader moved. He closed the distance to Sarah's table in 3 quick, silent strides. His hand snaked out, aiming for the strap of her tote bag. He was fast. Most people wouldn't have even registered his movement until it was too late. But Sarah Chen was not most people. The instant the tray had crashed, her focus hadn't shattered, it had simply shifted. The part of her brain that was writing an email went offline, and the part that had kept her alive in Fallujah and Kandahar booted up. Her peripheral vision, a honed instrument of spatial awareness, tracked the leader's entire approach. She saw his hand reach for her bag. She had less than a second to react. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She moved. It was a sequence of movements so fluid, so economical, it looked choreographed. As his fingers brushed the leather strap of her bag, her own right hand shot out from her lap. It wasn't a wild grab. It was a precise, surgical strike. Her hand clamped down on his wrist, her thumb and fingers finding the pressure points with unerring accuracy. At the same moment, she used his own momentum against him. With a subtle twist of her torso, she pulled him forward and down. His center of gravity shifted violently, and before he could comprehend what was happening, his face was pressed firmly against the cool surface of her table, his cheek smashed against a napkin dispenser. The entire takedown took less than 2 seconds. The crashing of the cups had just subsided, and the murmurs were still dying down when the would-be thief found himself pinned and helpless, a low groan of pain and surprise escaping his lips. Sarah didn't even look at him. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, were fixed on his two companions. The message was clear. Try it. His friends stood frozen, their roles in the distraction instantly reversed. They were the ones caught off guard. The bulky one near the door took a hesitant step forward, his face a mask of confused aggression. The other one just stared, his mouth slightly agape. Sarah finally looked down at the man pinned beneath her hand. Her voice was low, conversational, and utterly devoid of panic. That was a bad decision. She released his wrist, but only to shift her grip. In one smooth motion, she hooked her foot around the leg of his, sweeping him completely off balance. He landed on the floor with a hard thud that shook the nearby tables. Before he could even think of scrambling away, she was standing over him. She hadn't risen from her chair with any urgency. She had simply unfolded herself, and now she was there, a solid, immovable presence. She held out a hand, palm up. "The wallet," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. The young man on the floor, his bravado completely evaporated, stared up at her in disbelief. "What? I don't have your—" He stopped. The look in her eyes wasn't angry. It was something far more terrifying. A flat, calm certainty. It was the look of someone who had seen the worst humans could do to each other and had emerged not just unscathed, but utterly unimpressed by his petty crime. Then from behind her, the bulky friend finally decided to act. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline and a desperate need to save face in front of the now silent Café, he charged. He was a big guy, probably 220 pounds, and he came at her like a linebacker. Without turning around, Sarah Chen simply wasn't there anymore. She sidestepped, a minimal movement that opened up a space the exact width of his body. He blundered past her, off balance and committed to his charge. As he went by, she didn't try to punch or tackle him. She simply extended her arm and, with an open hand, gave him a firm, perfectly timed shove in the small of his back. It was like redirecting a charging bull with a single finger. His own momentum carried him forward, and he crashed headlong into a vacant table, sending it skidding across the floor and toppling over with a deafening clatter of metal and wood. The third man, the one by the restrooms, had seen enough. He turned and bolted for the door, nearly knocking over a customer who was just entering. He was gone. The cafe was utterly silent. Every single person was staring at the scene. The two men on the floor, one groaning and holding his wrist, the other tangled in a mess of table legs, and the calm, composed woman in the center of it all. The leader, still on the floor, fumbled in his jacket pocket and produced not Sarah's wallet, but his own. It fell from his trembling hand. He had been pickpocketing other patrons while his friends created the diversion. Sarah bent down and picked it up. She didn't open it. She just held it. By now, the cafe manager was rushing over, his face pale. I'd already pulling out his phone to call the police. Sirens could be heard in the distance. Someone had called them already. The leader, seeing his chance at escape fading, made one last stupid play. He scrambled to his knees, reaching for a discarded metal sugar canister, intending to use it as a weapon. Sarah saw the movement. She didn't move back. She moved forward. She closed the distance in a single step and dropped into a low crouch beside him. Her face was inches from his. In a voice so low only he could hear, she said, "I spent 20 years in places where men like you would be a footnote, where your little knife and your big friends wouldn't mean a thing. I've had people try to kill me with rocks, with rusty machetes, with IEDs that could turn a truck into confetti. Do you really think a sugar dispenser is going to work?" He froze, the canister half raised. He looked into her eyes, those flat, dark pools, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what fear was. It wasn't the fear of getting caught. It was the primal fear of being in the presence of something far more dangerous than yourself. The police arrived moments later. 2 officers strode in, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. The manager pointed at Sarah and the 2 men on the floor. The lead officer, a grizzled veteran named Corporal Miller, approached Sarah. He looked at the scene. The 2 subdued men, the overturned table, the complete absence of chaos around the woman, and his professional demeanor softened into one of instant recognition. "Ma'am," he said, his tone respectful, "can you tell me what happened here?" Before Sarah could speak, a young woman from a nearby table piped up. "She was amazing, officer. They tried to steal her bag and she just took them apart, like it was nothing." Another patron chimed in. "She barely moved. It was like a magic trick." Corporal Miller nodded, his gaze returning to Sarah. He saw the way she stood, the economy of her movement, the calm in her eyes. He'd seen that look before, on the faces of the military police he'd trained with, on the special forces guys who would rotate through his precinct for joint exercises. He glanced down at the wallet still in her hand, then at the man on the floor, who was now being Mirandized by the other officer. "I'm guessing this isn't your first rodeo," he said quietly to Sarah. The way you handled these 2, that's not self-defense classes at the YMCA." Sarah offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It's been a while." Corporal Miller leaned in, his voice dropping even lower. "Let me guess. Marines?" "Navy," she corrected gently. 20 years. Just retired." "SEALs?" he asked, the question more of a statement. He'd seen the tattoo, a small, faded trident on the inside of her wrist, partially hidden by a silver bracelet. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply handed him the thief's wallet. "Found this on him. I believe it belongs to the gentleman in the corner. The one in the blue shirt." The entire process of taking statements was efficient. The other victims came forward, gratefully reclaiming their stolen credit cards and cash. The 2 would-be thieves were hauled away, their faces a mixture of shame and residual terror. As the police cleared out and the cafe began to return to its normal rhythm, the manager came over to Sarah's table, a fresh, steaming latte in his hands. "It's on the house, ma'am," he said, his voice still a little shaky. "For life, if you want. That was incredible. Thank you." Sarah thanked him and took the latte. As she sat back down, the energy in the room had changed. People weren't just looking at her, they were looking to her. A young man gave her a respectful nod. A group of women whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with admiration. The quiet woman in the corner was no longer invisible. She was a guardian spirit, a reminder that strength often comes in the most unassuming packages. She turned back to her laptop. The email she'd been writing was still there, and half finished. She read it over, then deleted it. She had a new perspective now. She began to type again, her fingers moving swiftly over the keys, but this time her mind wasn't on work. It was on the look in that young man's eyes when she'd crouched beside him. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of insurgents she'd disarmed, in the eyes of terrified locals she'd pulled from firefights. It was the look of someone who had just had their entire worldview shattered. She thought about the path those young men were on. They weren't hardened criminals, not really. They were just stupid, arrogant kids who thought the world owed them something and had decided to take it. Maybe, just maybe, the lesson they learned today would stick. Maybe a brush with true, quiet capability would be more effective than any jail cell. But she finished her coffee, the latte tasting richer than it had any right to. As she gathered her things to leave, an older gentleman, the one in the blue shirt who had gotten his wallet back, approached her table. He had tears in his eyes. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My wife gave me that wallet for our 50th anniversary. It had a picture of her in it. She passed away last year. I don't know how to thank you." Sarah stood up. For the first time, her mask of calm composure slipped. Just for a second, revealing a flicker of genuine warmth. She reached out and gently touched his arm. "I'm glad I could help, sir. Take care of yourself." She walked out of the cafe, the little bell on the door chiming softly behind her. The morning sun was higher now, warmer. She walked down the street, and just another person in the flow of the city. But for those 15 seconds inside the grindstone, the world had been given a glimpse of the steel that lurked beneath the surface, a reminder that in a world of easy marks, there are still those who refuse to be one. They had taken her for an easy mark. In 15 seconds, they had learned the truth. They had chosen to challenge a force of nature, a woman who had spent 2 decades mastering the art of violence so she could live the rest of her life in peace. And in defending that peace, she had taught them a lesson they would never, ever forget.